Hey folks, this is Rhykker with the Gaming News Wrap-Up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard finally finalizing and Bobby on his way out, Overwatch 2 players being upset with the price of the Diablo skins, Disney possibly interested in now buying EA, and more. As always, discussion timestamps can be found in the description below. But right before you skip ahead, just a quick reminder to ring that sub notification bell to be alerted to new Saturday episodes and stay up to date with gaming news highlights. Now, before we move on, just a quick word from this video's sponsor, Dungeon Hunter 6, a game we've covered a couple times before. Dungeon Hunter 6 is a new installment in the classic hack-and-slash franchise that's been around since 2009. We made a lore video about the series a couple months back. It's a mobile RPG with a unique hero collector feature that just got added in this latest installment. I checked out the Dungeon Hunter booth at Gamescom and even interviewed some people who had just played the game to get their thoughts. You pick between a few classes, and then play progresses with the fast-paced combat of an action RPG. And it's free to play, so download the game now using the link in the description or scan the QR code to try it out. Now, one of the new things that Dungeon Hunter 6 introduces to the series is the ability to get bosses to serve you. For every boss in the game you defeat, there's a unique mechanic that either lets you ride them or fly them, and also summon them up to 3 times onto the battlefield to become members of your team, during which they'll follow you and can perform combo skills with you. You can even transform into the boss and use their ultimate skills in the late game. It's a pretty cool system that I haven't seen done in this genre before, and there's over 100 unique bosses in the game. And the game looks better than ever, fully leveraging the latest 3D graphics available on mobile devices. The game has both PvE and PvP, including real-time guild wars and guild raids. You also have different build options for each class, there's a trade system, and the game will be updated regularly with new classes releasing monthly. So, download Dungeon Hunter 6, it's free on both Android and iOS, use my link in the description below or scan the QR code if you're on PC. You'll get a special starter pack worth $50, which includes 10 summoning scrolls, 1 accessory pack, and 1 SSR Lieutenant, the Demonic Wolf. Then use your game account to enter the launch Lucky Spin event. You can win prizes like an iPhone 15 Pro Max, a PS5, an Apple Watch, and more. That all starts October 15th. Starting with some Diablo news. We got this week the patch notes for patch 1.2, which launches alongside Season 2 of Diablo 4 next week, October 17th. We got a full video giving a breakdown on the patch notes there, but overall, lots of good stuff in there. We also had a separate video going over all the Season 2 stuff in case you missed it. And it's important to remember what is coming to Season 2 and what is just coming to the base game, to the Eternal Realm. So even if you don't want to play Seasonal, if you don't want to have to restart, you're still getting a bunch of content added to the base game in the form of 5 new bosses to farm in the endgame to target farm specific unique items. Every boss has its own separate loot table. You can still get these items anywhere in the game, but these bosses have a higher rate to drop these items. One thing I still see a lot of confusion about though is the changes to vulnerable and crit damage. So historically these have been just way overpowered. All builds, all the top builds use and stack vulnerable and crit, incredibly powerful stats. So, and that is because they apply multiplicatively to your damage, whereas other damage modifiers for the most part are additive. They add to your damage, whereas the multiplicative ones multiply your damage. So the way it works, quite simply now, if an enemy is vulnerable, they take 20% more damage multiplicative, period. Then any extra vulnerable damage that you get, that is stacking on your gear, your paragon, whatever the case is, that is then slopped into the additive bucket along with all other sources of additive damage, like damage with core skills, damage against enemies on Tuesdays, and the same thing applies for crits. Crits, baseline, if you crit an enemy, that's a 50% damage multiplier on that. Then any extra crit damage you stack, that all gets slopped into the additive damage deck. In practice, what this means is, yes, we're all doing less damage in Season 2, but they said that they're rebalancing everything so that we're not going to feel too big of a difference. They're rebalancing the monsters, making the game easier. But what it means is, while yes, it's still important to crit to get that 50% damage multiplier, while it's still important to make enemies vulnerable to get that extra 20%, it's not nearly as important to stack a bunch of extra vulnerable damage and extra crit damage. You can stack other damage modifiers instead, and it's either more useful or potentially less useful. It kind of depends on your build, but it's not just get crit damage and vulnerable damage literally everywhere any way you can. Also, if you crit a vulnerable enemy, that's an 80% damage multiplier, the 20% times the 50%. Now, there's one particular new unique item added in Season 2, or Patch 1.2, that is absolutely fantastic, and I wish Blizzard used this as a template for all of their designs, or at least a lot more. It's the Dolmen Stone. It's a druid unique that makes it such that when you cast Baldur while you have Hurricane active, will cause your Baldur to rotate around you. This is Diablo 4's version of a Hammerdin, basically. So you activate your Hurricane, then you cast Baldur, and the Baldur, instead of acting like it normally acts, it gets swept up in the Hurricane. It's not a damage multiplier, it's not just changing some number, it's fundamentally changing the way the skill works in a really cool and fun way. And I love to see more items do things like that. Create interesting skill interactions, make skills behave differently. We also learned that coming in a patch after 1.2, but before the end of October, we're going to get a training dummy added, and you can configure this training dummy to act as either a boss, an elite, a group of enemies, and this is so that you can test your damage in all kinds of different environments. Now you don't have to puzzle through the math of, okay, am I doing more damage, less damage? You can just try it out in practice. Very easily. Just, swap an item, test your damage, swap an item, test your damage, swap a skill, test your damage, swap a passive, a paragon, whatever. Keep testing your damage and just see the actual numbers. Because having to factor in all the myriad of potential damage conditions needs nothing short of a computer to calculate how much damage you're practically doing. So this is a fantastic change. Again, not coming on October 17th, but by the end of the month. Now that said, it's not all good news. I mean, technically this is still going to be good news, but it's not as good as some people had hoped. So, the Battle Pass. Last season, Season 1, you got 666 of the premium currency. Because it's, it's 666 lulz, right? So you got 666 of the premium currency, and that wasn't enough. Not only was it not enough to buy the next Battle Pass, it wasn't enough to buy anything in the shop at all. So what they said was, for Season 2, you would be able to at least buy something with the amount of currency that you would get from the Battle Pass. So what is the amount of money you get from the Battle Pass? 700 of the premium currency instead of 666. Tiny amount more. And now there's some stuff in the shop that I think costs exactly 700 or you can buy something like either a backpack or a mount trophy for that amount of premium currency. A step in the right direction. Some players are complaining that this still isn't enough, but the dial has moved ever so slightly. Then in other news, Blizzard is still actively hiring for Diablo 4. As of right now, there are over a dozen job postings for the Diablo 4 team, including a senior systems designer who'd be making new game systems and mechanics, an activities designer whose job is to build, quote, endlessly fun, repeatable experiences, as well as a senior activities designer. Now, we're not aware of any high-profile people within the Diablo team who has left, and therefore they're needing to refill positions. It sounds like they're just continuing to build their team, so all indications are, no, Blizzard is not giving up on D4. They are continuing to pump resources into the game to improve it, to maintain it in the long run. And speaking of things that have been maintained in the long run, Median XL Sigma. This is like the longest running mod for Diablo 2, because in base Diablo 2, modding is still possible. Median XL Sigma is a huge total conversion mod. This is if you want to experience Diablo 2 like you've never experienced Diablo 2 before. It is Diablo 2 on absolute steroids and hallucinogens. If you've never checked it out and you're a fan of Diablo 2, it is absolutely worth checking out. Just be aware, this is a different game. You can't go in with a build that you're going to do. Everything is different. Different builds for all classes, and if you've played Median before, every so often they are adding, pretty much every season they make changes, they add new things. This season adds a solo self-found mode. The build changes focus on druids, paladins, and sorceresses. There's a bunch of quality of life improvements, including multiple improvements to the endgame experience. Diablo 2 by itself doesn't really have any endgame content, but mods like Median have added a bunch of endgame things to do. And of course, there's a bunch of buffs to numerous underused items, and a lot of the items are just new to the mod entirely. Definitely worth checking out at least one time in your life if you're a Diablo 2 fan. Then moving on to other Activision Blizzard and now Microsoft news. It finally happened. Pop the champagne. Good news, everyone. Microsoft has finalized its acquisition of Activision Blizzard. It is official. Activision Blizzard is now owned by Microsoft. Diablo is owned by Microsoft. Warcraft, StarCraft, these are all now Microsoft-owned IPs. And the best news of all, however, really, is the all but confirmation that CEO of Activision, Bobby Kotick, is going to be gone by the new year. Now, what he has communicated, and what has been communicated by other people, is that he's going to stick around until the end of the year. He didn't say he's leaving day one of 2024, but he said, I'm going to stick around until 2023 to see the transition through. This was said by both Bobby Kotick and by Phil Spencer, the boss of Xbox. And effective immediately, the entire board of directors of Activision Blizzard resigned. So it's just Bobby Kotick sticking around as the face until the end of the year. Then he's going to take his golden parachute, and I shouldn't say that on YouTube. He'll be gone. Why am I exuberant about all of this? I am generally not in favor of monopolies forming. This is not a monopoly, but it is a step towards having a future in which just a couple companies own everything. I'm generally not in favor of that. But there are instances in which I'll make exception, and this is one of those instances. I believe that under Activision's, and specifically the Activision board's oversight, Blizzard has been eroded down over the years. Into something that is less about making wonderful games and more about making money. And with this board of directors now gone, I think this is good news for Blizzard games, for Blizzard gamers, and for Blizzard employees. Microsoft, yes, makes tons of money. They are a money-making business. But if you look at their business strategy, it's less about milking something to the bone dry and just getting every penny out of your customers, and it's more about market share and just dominating market spaces. And so this is great for Microsoft because, one, they wanted to get into the mobile industry, and now ABK has been big in mobile. I mean, again, ABK, Activision Blizzard King. King makes Candy Crush. They've been big in mobile for a long time. Also, Blizzard and Activision now have been getting more into mobile, so Microsoft wants to get in on mobile revenue, but outside of that, they also just kind of want to have their hand in every genre. So they don't have an ARPG game yet. Now they do. Now they have Diablo as their ARPG. Activision wouldn't care about the RTS genre because the RTS genre is too small and too niche, and why bother putting resources into something that could only make 5 million sales when you can put all your resources into something like an FPS that can make 20 plus million sales. Microsoft doesn't care about that. Microsoft supports RTS. They just want to have an RTS so that if you're an RTS player, you can be consuming a Microsoft product. So this is great news for StarCraft. This is great news for a potential Warcraft 4. These are games that would not have been made under Activision because Activision would not have greenlighted them, because why allocate those resources when they can be allocated on WoW or on whatever else is going to make more money. That said, so many of the Blizzard veterans have left. I don't know that Blizzard even has a team of people that could make an RTS anymore. So many of them left in the last couple of years, or maybe a few more years than that now, and they've gone on to make their own companies, to make their own games, because they realize that it's just not going to be possible under Activision. So one thing I really wonder is, are we going to see now that the Activision board, the entire board, has resigned, and Bobby's going to be gone, are we going to see some of the Blizzard brass, some of the Blizzard veterans coming back to Blizzard now? Is Microsoft going to start making offers to people to return? I think that would be wise of them. I don't know if they'll want to return at this point. Theoretically, Microsoft could even acquire some of these other smaller studios made by Blizzard veterans and then give them StarCraft. Because Microsoft can do that now. They can outsource any of these Blizzard properties to anyone else that they deem fit. It's their decision now. Now, maybe I'm being too overly optimistic. Maybe literally nothing changes. Who knows? But I think we're allowed to have some hope here. And Activision Blizzard has gone out and said that they don't have plans to put Modern Warfare 3 or Diablo 4 onto Game Pass this year, But then once the deal closes, they expect to start working with Xbox to bring their titles to more players around the world. And they anticipate that they would begin adding games into Game Pass sometime in the course of next year. But meanwhile, managing editor at Windows Central, Jez Corden, has said that his sources contradict Activision's statement, saying that we can expect to see a bunch of Activision stuff hit Xbox Game Pass as soon as a deal is finalized. So we'll see, but it does make sense. We're probably going to see backlog of Activision and probably even Blizzard make it to Game Pass before end of year, but D4 and Modern Warfare 3 specifically, I highly doubt. I think they're going to want to get the Christmas sales of those titles. Everyone's spending money during the holidays. It's like the biggest spending period of the year. So if they send those games to Game Pass, that's a lot of missed sales that they can pretty easily get in December, November as well. But I suspect pretty early on in 2024, we might see those games start to make their way over. At the very least, I would expect in time for expansion 1 of Diablo 4, we might see the base game make it to Game Pass, and you would have to pay for the expansion instead. Meanwhile, Windows Central reported that prior to the acquisition finalizing, Bobby Kotick held an all-hands meeting of his company earlier in the week. And amongst other things, he mentioned a couple interesting things actually about his thoughts on the future of gaming. He spoke about how he thinks that we'll reach a point in the not too distant future where we're going to have some kind of interface that doesn't use a controller. Now, he said potentially the Neuralink from Elon Musk, but it could be something else as well. And he said, quote, "A big part of what I've seen in Microsoft is research, and they do development in areas that are extraordinary. And so being able to tap into their AI and machine learning capability, the data analytics, new ways of thinking about graphics, I just see unlimited potential for what we do, Activision Blizzard." Now, as an example of how AI machine learning has already helped graphics technology, DLSS. This is a tech where you are simulating a higher resolution than you actually have, and you can practically not tell the difference, but, it's using up 50% less processing power. So you can either run better graphics on weaker systems, or on your existing system, you can run better graphics on a powerful rig, or at least squeeze out better FPS. I'm a big believer that AI, machine learning, all this is changing our world in fundamental ways. The next 10 years are going to be absolutely wild. But as for the Neuralink type stuff, I'm not sold on that just yet. I don't think we're going to be there yet. VR hasn't really took off. I didn't expect it to take off for quite a while, and I think we're going to have similar resistance with this sort of neural interface stuff or the sort of non-controller stuff. Is it the future? Yeah, probably. Is it within the next 10 years? I doubt we're going to be getting that level of tech become commonplace or anything more than just a novelty in the next decade. But I turn the question to you folks. What are your thoughts? Meanwhile, in other news, Overwatch 2 players are, I was going to say miffed. They're quite well upset, some of them are at least, at the price of the Diablo skins. We have a Moira skin that is Lilith, and we have a Pharah skin that is Inarius. These were added as part of a bundle, and the only way to get these skins is by spending $40 on the Advanced Battle Pass. You cannot buy the skins individually for a cheaper cost. You can't even use the in-game premium currency that you might have earned elsewhere. Literally the only way to get these skins is by forking over $40. Now, this isn't the first time that we've brought up the cost of the premium battle pass for Overwatch 2. There was another time when it cost $40 and people were upset, but it was sort of justified at the time because as part of that $40, you would get forever unlocked to your account the first set of PvE missions. It was always expected that the PvE part of the game would be something you would have to pay for. And okay, it's part of this $40 bundle. That's how you justify these $40. You're selling, these PvE mission packs as part of it. Now we have another $40 bundle, no PvE mission packs, just the cosmetics. So some players are saying, what's going on? Is it that now that we showed we're willing to pay $40, you're just going to keep charging $40 even if you don't give us missions? And to give you some sense of scale, in 2016 when Overwatch launched, it cost $40. That was the price of the actual game, $40. The game is free to play now, but just to put a sense of scale of the cost of the Battle Pass, that previously got you the entire base Overwatch game. At the end of the day though, when people ask, sometimes people ask me, how much Do you think this is too expensive, or how much should this cost? How much should the Battle Pass cost? And at the end of the day, things cost whatever people are willing to pay. When Overwatch 2 made it to Steam, it made it onto the top 10 best-selling by revenue list. So clearly people are willing to pay. I mean, obviously it's outrageous to pay the same amount of money for a Battle Pass as it is to pay for an entire game. But if people are willing to pay it and people are spending that money, I mean, what can you do? Then on to some Starfield modding news. Someone has made a wonderful quality of life mod that removes the temple puzzles. Without going into too much detail, there are instances within the game where you reach a place and then you have to do a puzzle. It takes a few minutes to figure out, and then this repeats itself about 24 times throughout the course of the game, and every time the puzzle is exactly the same. And you have to do it, and this has become annoying for some players. So the mod just eliminates the puzzle, it just skips it. You just step inside the temple, you wait a few seconds, you get your reward, and you can move on. If you want to download that mod, link in the description, but the best mod for Starfield has released. It is a mod that replaces all the ships in the game with Thomas the Tank Engine. This brings me back to the time when the same thing was done with Skyrim. They had a mod that replaced all the dragons with Thomas the Tank Engine. And this is one of the many reasons that I love modding. Link to that mod in the description as well. In other news, Disney is allegedly looking to make some kind of major acquisition to get back into the gaming industry, and EA is a company that it is eyeing. Now that said, it's not all of Disney. The biggest holdout is the CEO himself, who has some reservations. Basically, Bob Iger is non-committal on the issue. But the idea is to acquire something like EA or as big as EA. See, right now, Disney sells licenses to its properties, but a lot of executives have been like, well, how about instead of just licensing them, we publish games? According to Bloomberg, these talks have been in the works since last year. They've reportedly had talks with Amazon, with Apple, and with NBC Universal. And in particular, NBC Universal, those talks fell through. Now, what's interesting is that Disney was a game publisher until 2016, when it shut down its game publishing division. Now, Disney has worked with EA before. They gave EA a 10-year exclusivity deal to the rights of Star Wars to make whatever Star Wars games they want. That deal ended in 2021 with all of just a couple Star Wars games having been made. It was a tremendously wasted opportunity by EA. They could have made so many different Star Wars games. It was a period of Star Wars renaissance, and they absolutely squandered that license. Now, the advantage that Disney has had in not publishing games and just selling the license has been that they're not taking on the risks. Developing a AAA game takes years, and you're gambling on this game being successful because the costs to make a AAA game are astronomical. And given Disney has not exactly shown great decision-making in giving that 10-year exclusivity deal to EA, I can understand why Bob Iger is a little hesitant. Maybe they understand the film industry a little bit better than the gaming industry, and he's not quite ready to take on all the risks associated with AAA game development. Follow up to another story now, Unity, the game engine. A couple weeks back, they announced a change to their pricing structure. Everyone hated it, everyone was upset, and this week, the CEO of Unity, John Riccitiello, has retired. The board has appointed an interim CEO as they're looking for a full-time replacement. John Riccitiello, formerly with EA, was CEO of Unity since 2014. And it's less than a month now after announcing this massive change that he's out. To some degree, this feels like the people won. And you might wonder, how come we don't see more stories like this? Companies pretty regularly make unpopular moves that piss off people, right? How come Bobby Kotick has been around for the longest time, for argument's sake? Why don't we see more CEOs leaving, getting exited after big consumer upheaval? And I think the key here is the difference between the kinds of consumers we're dealing with. So in general, right, when you're just the consumer of a product, you actually have very little agency in being able to effectuate change. You're just one voice, and even if you get a bunch of other people to clamor and speak up, just as we were talking about before in the case of the Overwatch 2 Battle Pass, it doesn't matter if 70-75% of consumers refuse to pay if there's still enough whales, if there's still enough people left that are willing to pay. Ultimately, whales will be whales, and it's kind of rare that the whales get pissed off enough because they have the money and whatever, it's still nothing to them. Whether it's $10 or $40, it makes no difference when you're wealthy enough to just toss around that kind of money on something recreational. But here's the distinction. Unity, you're not selling to customers, you're selling to businesses. The people using your product are not doing so recreationally, they are doing it because they are building their entire business on it. And there are bigger businesses and smaller businesses. And it's not about, oh, I enjoy Unity because it's fun to play Unity. No, this is just a tool, and there are other tools out there. And if suddenly your tool is no longer an inviting option, well, businesses can just threaten to swap to a different tool. And now once you have a bunch of your big customers no longer doing business with you by buying your tool, well, now you're screwed. It's a difference between, there's an ice cream shop and they charge absurdly high prices for their ice cream sundaes, right? The cones are affordable, but their sundaes are absurdly priced. Okay, they're appealing to a more premium market. Customers might be pissed that the sundaes are so expensive, but maybe rich people are gonna go and still buy those sundaes. Then contrast that with an ice cream supplier to an ice cream shop suddenly raises their prices. Well, this relationship is entirely transactional. You're not selling me something that I value intrinsically. You are just a means to an end for me, and as such, I'm just going to go to whatever is the more affordable means to my end, i.e. getting the material to run my business and sell my ice cream to customers. If the ice cream shop pisses off a couple of its hundreds or thousands of customers, well, sucks that they're not coming back. But if a supplier pisses off a couple of the businesses it's supplying to, well, that probably consists of a significant portion of its revenue and income, and it's going to feel their loss much more dramatically. Then in another follow-up story, the Gollum game. Geez, the disastrous Gollum game that was so bad that the developers issued an apology for the game. Well, it turns out that the developers did not issue an apology. The publisher had ChatGPT generate an apology and posted it without the knowledge or consent of the developers. This is according to developer interviews with German gaming outlet Game2, spotted by Noble, and this is according to multiple former Daedalic staff members. Now, in fairness, the big thing here isn't so much that it was written by ChatGPT. All these apologies are basically just corporate speak run through a bunch of PR language. So it's not like you're otherwise getting a heartfelt apology, right? You might as well have ChatGPT generated, it doesn't really matter. But it's more so that it was the publisher that did this, not the devs, basically trying to pretend that it was coming from the devs, and without the devs' consent. In other news, Counter-Strike 2 is now Valve's worst rated game on Steam, which isn't even that bad, to be honest. It's got mixed reviews, 66% are positive. That's of the recent 168,000 reviews. Of course, because Counter-Strike 2 just replaced CSGO, it's got tons of reviews from before that, because it's just an updated listing for a game that's gotten reviews for years. But even then, again, 66% of the recent reviews are positive, so it's not like the majority are negative. Now, it's not too uncommon that when a new Counter-Strike drops, it gets some initial negative reaction from the veterans. The game will probably bounce back, especially as Valve continues to support and update the game. A lot of the negativity is because this replaces CSGO, so players don't even have the option to go back and play the previous game. And separately, Valve has confirmed that the game is not going to release on Mac OS. They said, quote, "As technology advances, we have made the difficult decision to discontinue support for older hardware, including DirectX 9 and 32-bit operating systems. Similarly, we will no longer support Mac OS. Combined, these represented less than 1% of active CSGO players." And if you look at the Steam numbers by itself, Mac users account for like 1.5% of Steam users, so it's really no surprise, and it's also why a lot of modern games that even historically supported Mac just no longer are. While it is unfortunate, the resources needed to support the games on these platforms, the numbers just don't work out for how much revenue you get for supporting the platform. However, an important note is that Valve says that Mac players will be eligible for a Prime status upgrade refund if most of their CSGO playtime was on Mac OS and they played CSGO on a Mac between the announcement of Counter-Strike 2 Limited Test in March 22nd and the launch of Counter-Strike 2 on September 27th, regardless of when they purchased their Prime status upgrade. And they're going to offer these refunds until December 1st. So they are at least trying to make things right. Now, speaking of games that are sequels that are replacing existing games, let's talk a bit about Payday. Now, Payday 3 released a couple weeks back. We spoke about how it had a pretty bad launch. And as of right now, if you look at the Steam numbers, Payday 2 is consistently played significantly more than Payday 3. We're talking 2-3 times more players, concurrent players logged in and playing on Steam in Payday 2 than in Payday 3. A lot of players feel that the game is just a step backwards in many ways. First off, it's always online. Second, there's a lot of missing quality of life things. Third, a lot of things like in the menus just feel clunky. It's taking long for patches to come out. And with everyone just kind of going back to Payday 2, it starts to make sense why a developer might think it a good business decision to discontinue their previous game and have their new game just replace it, so that the customer is forced to go to the new product and they cannot return to the previous product that was better, but that isn't generating revenue. Then in a quick story, Baldur's Gate 3 won PlayStation Blog's Game of September 2023. At the end of every month, the official PlayStation blog website hosts a poll, and honestly, this doesn't surprise me at all. Baldur's Gate 3 won Game of the Month in September. I honestly think it's going to win a lot of Game of the Year awards come December. In some Path of Exile news, we got an update on upcoming expansion 3.23. It's going to launch in early December because the scope is quite ambitious. It was originally planned for late November. And the next Path of Exile 2 showcase will also be released during the 3.23 announcement livestream, which will be in late November. It's always exciting when they have a big expansion. I'm looking forward to see what their next big idea is going to be. And in the meantime, folks, if you haven't seen it, I released this week my interview with Rishi from the Path of Exile team. He's in charge of unique items. We talk about uniques in PoE 1, PoE 2. Do be sure to check out that interview. And also, if you haven't seen my interview with Chris Wilson and Jonathan Rogers, that went up a few weeks ago as well. Do give that a look. And lastly, a follow-up on the layoffs at Team 17, developers of Worms. Allegedly, their layoffs could hit as much as 1/3 of the company. 91 jobs are at risk. They're restructuring, and it's going to be by the end of next month that they're going to have made their decisions on who's got to go. QA, marketing, usability, HR, IT, customer service, all these teams being affected. And it was previously announced that the CEO is stepping down by the end of the year, and it's been confirmed that the digital CEO has left the company too. Again, altogether, not great news for Team 17. And that's going to wrap up this week's video, but do be sure to check out last week's video discussing how the Overwatch League is dead and possibly a big segment of Blizzard's esports endeavors. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more gaming content.